That is what running power, regardless, we just forget about how they're measuring it or, the nuances of the number, whether it's metabolic or mechanical. It is, for once, giving us that objective number to say, like, this is really insightful as to why you were unable to maintain a pace, or achieve the finishing time that you otherwise thought possible. My hierarchy system of we have these three metrics. We have the triangle, of heart rate, pace, power. How do we use them? And how do we use them together based off of the knowledge that we have to ensure that we always have a metric that we can rely on?
Welcome to the TrainingPeaks CoachCast. I'm your host, Dirk. In each episode, we'll sit down with industry experts to discuss coaching methodologies, the latest research, and leading tools for endurance training. Visit trainingpeaks.com for more training and coaching resources. My next guest is Dr. Will O'Connor, who's a sports scientist located in New Zealand. He has made a name for himself by helping runners and triathletes incorporate running with power into their training programs. Dr. O'Connor works to curate sports science for coaches, athletes, and brands to coach better, race faster, and create better products. You can learn more from Dr. O'Connor within his Fundamentals of Running course within TrainingPeaks University, and you can hear more from Dr. O'Connor on his Performance Advantage podcast. I hope you enjoy this episode about how to incorporate running with power into your training. My guest today is Dr. Will O'Connor, all the way from New Zealand. Is that where you're at right now?
Yep, Rotorua, New Zealand, just ahead of the Tarawera Ultra Marathon this weekend, actually.
Oh, wow, nice. Are you doing that or coaching folks for
No,
it?
I'm not. This will be the first year I haven't done it in maybe 5 years or so. It's my wife's turn.
Oh, nice. Yeah,
Yeah.
You got to give back for sure within the family.
Oh, yeah, you got to take your turns.
So, hey, I want to talk about running with power. We get millions of run files every month coming into TrainingPeaks, and somewhere north of 30% of them now have power within them. So I think obviously that trend is going up as more devices incorporate run with power, as more devices just have a default on, and all of a sudden there's this brand new metric in a lot of athletes' TrainingPeaks accounts. And a lot of folks and even coaches, are still learning about this, and it's new-ish. It's not widespread per se, but it's a growing trend. So I think it's really good to kind of get more grounded around run with power, bring on an expert so that if you're seeing this new metric in your account or your client's accounts, you can kind of start to make sense of it and maybe choose to actually leverage it, to your benefit. So give us a little bit of background on when you started running with power and coaching with power.
Sure. So, it's been a couple of years since I first came on. We launched the Fundamentals of Running Power course on TrainingPeaks University.
Yep.
And like you say, a lot has happened in terms of integration, but then also not much has happened.
Yeah, okay.
But so all the way back to me first finding the Stryd running power meter when it was a heart rate strap. And I think that was their second iteration. I think the very first Kickstarter campaign they launched in maybe 2014 was maybe a waist belt or a foot pod, which it is a foot pod now. Mm-hmm. And so during my Ph.D, I came across it. An athlete I worked with, I don't know how he had one. He goes, someone gave me this. I have no idea what it is. Here, have it. And I was like, okay, running power, this is interesting. So this must have been 2015, 2016. We're getting close to a decade now old.
Yeah.
I played around with it and I wrote this blog. It was just when I was doing my first ultra marathon, running 100 Ks with a power meter. Yes, running was the title, and it really took off and people were they just couldn't make sense of it. How does this work? And I just did a quick Google, running power. And then I Googled cycling power, and the running power results are still, what is it? Almost everything front page Google is just, what is it?
Right.
Whereas you go cycling it's all how to use it, you know, top 10 booster workouts, like analyzing your files, stuff like this. So cycling, we know it's super well accepted, and people it's default, people use it. With running, it's still what is it? And so anyway, I got into it and I started using it, and Stryd started getting better at their device that they were making. And that was it. That was all you had for running power, was the Stryd running power meter, third-party device that, like any cycling power meter, you know, that nothing's integrated into your Garmin or your Wahoo head unit or whatever.
Yeah.
And it was just as I was kind of leaving triathlon into trail running. As I was writing my thesis, I didn't have time to do 5-hour bike rides and everything. And I just found it such an amazing metric for controlling intensity over varied terrain. You know, so you're talking about you're running up hills, you're running down hills, you're really trying to accurately manage effort and energy across a really long duration. As soon as you start to step into or step off of very controlled terrain, like a road marathon, like any kind of standardized road event, pace starts to get very confusing. There's a lot of nuance to that. Nowadays, we have multi-band GPS that's kind of released early last year. So now GPS accuracy is honestly but like 10 times better than it was even just a few years ago, to be able to get better accuracy out on the trails or in heavily populated cities. So you can use that, but the running power still is going to be, I found, like a better means to managing effort. And it also, so that's how I started using it, just playing around, just figuring out how do I use this new number, this new metric in my toolbox to manage like my effort, first of all, being the kind of self-experimenter that I am, and then helping runners, triathletes, like use it in their day-to-day training.
Okay. So bring us back to explain power in the first place.
Yes, sure.
How does that
even
relate to like a bike power meter?
Yeah. Okay. So power is force times velocity. So that's like, if we simplest term, you exert force on the ground and you're moving forward at a rate, you know, whatever pace that is, minutes per K, minutes per mile, kilometers per hour. And it's power is going to be like the amount of work you're doing over time. Like how much energy did it take you to cover 1 kilometer or 1 mile? North America, let's use miles. So you got 1 mile, and let's say, oh no, I'm not going to be able to do pounds. Let's say you weigh 100 kgs and you're running the mile in 8 minutes. Okay. In order to get your mass across that 1 mile, you have to exert a certain amount of force on the ground to be able to go an 8 minute mile. And that takes an amount of energy. We know the time, like 8 minutes. So we get that unit of energy that you're working at, that power. How much power are you putting out? Mm-hmm. And at the moment, it's going to get more confusing because I'm just talking about mechanical work.
Yeah.
All right. So that's, and then when we're thinking about cycling, it's very simple. You push down on the pedal, and there's going to be a strain gauge somewhere, whether it's in the pedal, the crank, the rear hub, whatever. And it just measures how much force was exerted when you push down on the pedal. And then you have the rate at which the pedals are spinning. So your RPMs, right? And then you know there's a unit of time and there's a unit of force. And so there's a like angular velocity of you spinning your pedals. Force times velocity equals power.
I mean, and it's just, so if we think about the different ways to target intensity, prescribe intensity, describe, heart rate, pace, rate of perceived exertion is really how most runners have always thought. And really, I think most runners think about pace maybe first.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah. And now if you stay to an athlete, go out and run a 7:30 pace for 5 kilometers, and the athlete chooses a flat course, all right, great. But if there's some hills in there and they're maintaining a 7:30 pace, and the goal of the workout was to stay in zone 2, which is a 7:30 pace, let's say, for this pretty fast runner.
Sure.
They come to a hill, they maintain a 7:30 pace. What happens? Heart rate will go up. Heart rate might reach threshold heart rate potentially. Are they therefore doing zone 2 intensity? No, they probably are not. They're no longer at fat max. They're now burning a lot of carbohydrates, maybe no fat at all, but they're still at a 7:30 pace. They come back, they say to the coach, hey coach, look, I'd maintain 7:30 for 5K. Coach might say, perfect, as described, or they might say, oh, well, actually, geez, you know what? I didn't want you to do that hilly course because you didn't maintain a zone 2, and this is why. Look at your heart rate. How do you therefore attack that problem using power if you are now prescribing that workout with power?
Sure. So you forget about pace and you say from testing, so your standard, whatever kind of functional threshold pace test you want to do, you find out your threshold, your running power threshold, and you have all the same zones you have with heart rate and pace, whatever zone system you want to prescribe to, whatever it is. Okay, you still have that threshold, and we can still say zone 2, or we can say we want you to run 80 to 85%. This is perceived fat max. Let's go for that. You hit that climb, and you're ticking along 300, 310 watts, and then it starts to go 350, 380 watts. This is not the goal. This is beep beep. This is outside of zone, and it happens because of that force velocity calculation. Yes, you're maintaining the same velocity, 730, but the force you're exerting on the ground, the amount of energy you like having to exert to run that pace up a hill, then begins to increase, and we get that feedback instantaneously, which we never had before. And now you did say heart rate, right? Heart rate will increase. And I kind of had two terms when I'm describing running power, correlating them to pace and heart rate. Heart rate is the dial-up broadband of metrics, right? It's slow. It's not ultra fiber. It's gonna take a little while. And then when we have GPS, we have a measurement from space. And I think people forget that. They forget that this whatever little tiny screen on our wrist is actually getting the measurement from satellites in orbit. So people take it as gospel, as the most accurate thing that's going to measure their distance or pace, but it still has inaccuracies in it. And so then when we have running power, yes, we have inaccuracies in there because unlike cycling, we don't have the direct measurement of the strain gauge, right? As soon as you put down on the pedals when you're cycling, the strain gauge will pick up on
it's a direct
measure
force
on the strain. Direct measure. We don't have the direct measure in running power. We have accelerometers and algorithms. Now we have algorithms in cycling as well because that force and the angular velocity, so the rate at which you're pedaling, it still needs to be all merged together. There's temperature, there's the length of the crank. There's all these things that still need to be algorithmically output. But with running, there is more to it because we've got however many accelerometers that are trying to determine your path through three-dimensional space. So, I guess I'm not going to comment directly on the specific accuracy of this, but nowadays, like what I can see is a definitive change whenever you are altering your energetic output. So when you run up a hill, you will see a change. Whether that change directly correlates with the exact amount of increased force you're putting out, look, we just don't really know right now. But it is reproducible and accurate enough that I see it and use it to be like a very helpful resource.
Right. So no matter what, I mean, there's many devices now, everything from the Apple Watch to Stryd, Coros, Garmin. There's many
Polar, Sunto.
Running with power devices out there. So they all will have a good gauge of increases or decreases in actual power output. But you can't compare that power between devices. So if you and I have two different makes of power meter, and we weigh the same, we're on the same hill, go on the same pace, we still may see a difference in the actual absolute power output from those two different manufacturers.
Yeah, a lot of like Apple, Coros, Stryd, they're all quite similar. You know, if we were weighing the same, we could have similar numbers that would at least be comparable. Like, are you running 300? Yeah, I'm about that.
Okay.
Garmin will be 25% higher typically because they integrate the energy return from the ground reaction force. So let's not worry about too much about how, but like there's a lower limb spring, and when we land on the ground, our tendons and muscles compress. They store some energy that we then get back when we run. How much you get back depends on your running economy, blah blah blah. But Garmin does record, like I guess it integrates that energy into their running power number, so they will always be higher. But you know, you've probably had a number of cycling power meters over the years, and even just on your different bikes, so you know that the same thing can happen. You could be 20, 30 watts difference for the exact same effort. I remember when stages first came out, you know, being the left only, they were always lower than a dual sided.
Yeah. You know, are they accurate enough to measure like a headwind versus tailwind on flat terrain? Or even if you go from pavement to gravel, will you see changes? So 1 wind and 2 surface?
I see changes, but probably not enough.
Yeah.
I think to really decipher. Oh, and this is talking about the Stryd, which has the wind sensor in it. If you're using a wrist only, so all your standard watch manufacturers now have the running power built in.
Yeah.
There's no way they would pick up on whatever kind of headwind or tailwind or differentiation in surface. The new Stryd, so the next generation Stryd, I believe that came out around July 2023. Might have been just before that. I'm in New Zealand, Southern Hemisphere, so I did a cross-country season, and that was the first time I had seen consistency across values, or at least a true, more accurate representation of running off-road compared to... So I did a cross-country race with the older version of the Stryd, and then the newer version with the higher processing power in it. And I was, you know, the result was about the same, and time, duration, course was kind of similar, but I had 40 watts more. And it was almost in line. It was pretty much exactly 390 something. Say I did a 10K race, 396. I did this 10K cross country and it was like 392. Whereas the one I did previously was about 360 something, which just didn't make any sense. Like my threshold is around like 380, 390. And so to be doing this cross country race below threshold, and even with a normalized power of, it was still below threshold. And I was like, no way. I don't have a heart rate in the, getting up to 190 by doing that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How does it compare to cycling power? I mean, that's maybe folks may have a lot of experience with cycling power. Now they're seeing it in the running. Is it supposed to be the same? Like, is there any sense in looking at the two? Like, are they supposed to be relatively the same in terms of like a threshold?
Oh, I see. Like comparing the two, not at all.
Yeah.
You can't. They're just completely. They're completely independent. Yeah. So
Okay.
with cycling, we're very much concentrated on the mechanical work. We have the mechanics to measure the strain and the force and the energy going through the system, which is the bike. Whereas in running, it's still kind of a little hazy as to whether we're trying to determine metabolic power or mechanical power.
Yeah.
So metabolic power being how much energy is it taking you to run the 730 mile? Because there's the mechanical work, and when cycling, we take the mechanical work and we interpret it as like, I guess, a proxy for metabolic work. Your mechanical threshold, the amount of power the 300 watts you can do for 20 minutes or whatever, we know that 95% that's probably going to be around your anaerobic threshold, which is, in cycling, I'm not sure. I think what's standard efficiencies in cycling, around 25% or so.
Yeah.
So anyway, you can kind of say you're going to be probably utilizing a metabolic workload like greater than the whatever power you're putting out, because you're losing so much through heat and all that.
Yep.
Whereas in running, there's some reports that it's how much metabolic work are you doing as opposed to how much mechanical work you're doing. And at the fundamental level, it doesn't really matter, because the way we're using this number that's being reported as running power is merely just a means to control our energy across a distance or duration.
Yeah. What about limitations? So if you are a trail runner and you're walking, or if you're going up a very steep climb and you're just hiking with your hands on your knees going up a super steep rocky climb, where does this wattage, or does it have limitations? And you just have to, there's too much walking or hiking in this file. I can't really rely on the power output from this type of course, for example.
Yeah, I think the limitations exist within the same bell curve as pace. When we're going really slow, if we're hiking up a 14er, just a massive technical climb, pace is irrelevant, power is irrelevant. We're going to have to rely on heart rate.
Yeah.
Because it's not something that's going to take us an hour or hours or tens of minutes. And so we can rely on heart rate because we're at such a relatively low intensity. It's going to be reactive enough for us to say, this is below zone 2, this is, in zone 3, whatever it is.
Yep.
Then we get into the bell curve. And if we kind of picture a bell curve in our head, and you've got the two tails on the left and right, in the middle, you'd kind of start around zone 2 and finish around, say, zone 4, a bit above threshold. Outside of that, now you're sprinting and or you're doing, and you don't really look at anything. If I say go hard for 30 seconds, you're not.
So you're not saying do 8 20-second hill repeats at 500 watts.
I mean, you say that, but people just do whatever they want anyway. Like, it's a great reference point to go, how hard should I be going?
Yeah.
And you can check at the end when you get the lap summary. Oh, that was 700 watts. That's probably a bit much, but like it'll be there. But it's in such a short duration. Did it pick up to
Right.
pick up the very initial 5-second phase and the slowing down, like what is the actual number? Not sure, but when we're starting to use zone 2 through to zone 4, so around your, let's say, peaking out around 5K race pace from zone 2, which we all know, within that range is going to be very, very valuable. And then once we get onto the trail and going upstairs and all of that kind of stuff, you start to exit the normalized 3D model that these algorithms are modeled on. So it's like your foot follows a certain path, whether you're a atrocious runner or the most efficient runner in the world, your foot's kind of following a normal path when you're running. As soon as you start to walk or go, upstairs, you kind of disassociate from this normalized path. And so now the data is not going to be as reliable.
So if you're prescribing a workout for a trail runner and a portion of it is going to be great, like on easy gravel, pavement, but then a portion of it will be very steep hiking, you might say, okay, on these bits, follow this wattage, but outside of that, keep your heart rate at X zone. So you might do a 2-dimensional type of like intensity modeling for a specific workout.
Yep. Yeah, that's right. So you go, it's hard to visualize where every runner is going to be running. And so you say the goal is going to be zone 4 or marathon, whatever numbers your range you're setting yourself, and keep an eye on heart rate. Like if it becomes extremely technical, then heart rate needs to still be within zone 4 or under 97%. But it's the same for pace, right?
True. Yeah. I mean, if the hill gets too steep on this road course, you can throw away pace and just gauge off heart rate or RPE.
Yeah.
And so speaking of zones, how do you go about setting zones based off power? What kind of protocols do you have your athletes do? How can someone estimate? Are you anchoring it to the threshold power? Do you have multiple anchoring points to create these? Do you have a 6-zone system?
I have a 7 zone system. So the best way I've seen is to do a 1 kilometer and a 5 kilometer time trial.
Okay.
And then, so that's kind of it creates the critical power curve. There's a lot of reports out there. Initially, Stryd was saying 3 minutes and 9 minutes. I found that a little too short at the 9-minute mark to extrapolate out all the way to saying your zone 2 is now this, or I saw it kind of overestimate. And then rather than having time, I fixed distance, which is more, I guess, cognitively accepted, and as an anchoring point to go, okay, I just have to run 1 kilometer. And then you could have 1 mile as well. I mean, it doesn't really matter. Southern hemisphere, we use kilometers. So that just gives, for most people, it's going to be 3 to 5 minutes as the minimum. And then it's going to be around that 20-minute mark for the maximum for your 2 points of reference. And I found that creates a pretty good critical power curve. There's a calculator on my website, but whether you use the term critical power, threshold power, whatever, and then that creates that initial reference point, which you can then set your zones from. The other step I use, like especially onboarding a new client or athlete in TrainingPeaks, is I just go through history and just go to peak 20 minutes in the last 3 months.
Okay.
And so then I can pull out peak 20-minute power last 3 months, and then I can see where that came. Like, did that come in just a general run? Like, was it noise, or did that come during a half marathon, which it typically does, a half marathon or a 10K? Great. I know I can use plus or minus. I can check another couple of workouts to see if my numbers are correct. and go, yeah, I'll use that number as our initial reference point. And then we can go and you can set your standard, use one of your standard workouts that you use every other week or every week with every single athlete in your stable, like a 4x1 mile. And the pace, you can know it off the top of your head for like any marathon time duration runner. Set that, but set it to running power. And you go, okay, well, you should, based off of all my knowledge of this workout and who you are and your marathon, like you should be able to hold zone 4 right in the middle, if not top end, for all of these. Mm-hmm. And after you've said it, and that's just a great reference point without anyone having to do like a hardcore 5K test, or another test is, the 30-minute test, and you can take the average of the last 20 minutes.
Okay.
You can do the FTP, like bike-based FTP test, 20 minutes all out, which I would suggest doing a 5K, because again, no one really runs 20 minutes all out.
Right.
they run 5K, 3 miles. Like, yeah, sure, do that all out. And you can take 95% of that. So, in terms of establishing that power threshold, it's all the same stuff that we've learned over the last decades of pace or heart rate or cycling power. You can use that, and then you need to double check it, test it, make sure that you and the athlete has their head around what that means.
Yeah. So you're trying, let's say someone's training for the marathon, you figure out their threshold pace, that's zone 4. How would you go about, so then the goal is to increase your power output for the length of the marathon. So are you trying to increase power output with the marathon?
Yes and no, because as you become more efficient, so let's take the easiest way these days to become more efficient is you throw on some super shoes.
Okay. Yeah.
Right. So you throw on a
10% faster. No.
No. A Nike Alpha Flies. Right. Now you can run at the same power output, like the energetic output, the amount of energy you're putting out, whether it's mechanical or metabolic, is going to be 300 watts. But because of the energy return of the shoes, you just got 5 seconds per mile. Not too dissimilar to throwing on an aero helmet or a set of wheels. So and then as you get fitter, you may lose weight, lose body mass. So you may be able to get a longer stride length and lower vertical oscillation, which is the accelerometers are picking up on that, which is part of your running economy. And so you were at that 300 watts, you just gained an extra couple of meters or
speed,
few feet. Yeah, you got free, quote unquote, free speed,
right,
out of that. So when I'm training someone, I'm really not interested in looking at power as a metric that we're trying to improve. Can you run whatever it is? Like we're trying to get 300 watts. Like, can we get you up to 310 for sure? Like, and have that as a sustainable, steady state heart rate, whatever. But more so, it's just, we're still looking at pace. Like, it's the time it takes from start to finish is going to be one of the most important things we have a measure of, like when we're running a race.
So you might have someone that does a 2:10 marathon compared to another person that does a 2:30 marathon, and the 2:30 person could be putting out more watts.
Oh yeah, they almost definitely would be, because they'd probably be heavier and less economical. Yeah.
But let's say we normalize it to watts per kilogram.
Sure. Yeah.
Then the faster runner is running faster at watts per kilogram, no matter what. Is that?
Yeah.
Got it. So another weird example, does a beginner runner start with just a lot of power output because they're so horribly inefficient that your job is actually to get rid of watts in a way? Like a cyclist thinks like, I got it from day one, I need to increase my wattage. But yet if I'm a horrible runner and I'm beginning, I just got a power meter, as I get faster, I'm actually going to see my power go down. Is that correct?
Yeah, but at this stage, like I guess it's kind of the client base that I work with. I'm not saying that as a hugely like significant number, where you're like, you start out cycling and you struggle to get over 200 watts, and then as, like a standard middle-aged male probably number, and then you're trying to get up to 300. Yeah. And that kind of variation is not going to happen. You're not going to be running so horribly inefficient. We're talking like, let's say an inefficient runner is maybe hitting 20%, 27% loss of, like, can we call it loss energy, inefficiency, right? And then you can get down to the most efficient, like 2-hour marathon runners at 19%. Now you're not going to get there. You're not going to go from, a 27% person to an 18, 19. You could get in zone 2, let's say you're 27 to 30%. You could get down to say a 23 to 25 percent. But within that would be so much more variation from you getting fitter, and that you're actually able to now run so much faster because you're so much fitter in your zone 2, that the numbers are kind of increasing while they're decreasing.
Right.
If that makes sense, like, because you've gone from running a 10-minute mile in zone 2 at a 30% inefficiency to now running a 8:30 mile in zone 2 at a 26% inefficiency. Like, it's, you wouldn't, within the noise, you wouldn't really discern that.
Yeah. What do you ever now go into decoupling and compare heart rate and power? We have that in TrainingPeaks. So the power versus heart rate decoupling over a particular long interval, let's say.
Especially back end, middle marathon, half marathon efforts. And ultra marathon, definitely. Where we can, where it's consistent enough depending on the terrain but even over a long duration, you can smooth a lot of the data to, if there is a lot of technical trail and elevation, still over, if you're comparing 2 half-an-hour blocks, you can still look to see what is the decoupling, and that is what you're referring to as the heart rate power output relationship. So that is, a direct correlation would be it's set at 150 heart rate and it's set at 300 watts, and there's no variation whatsoever. But there's always going to be a component of cardiac drift and a decoupling. And so I look at that. Yeah, I definitely look at that within half marathon workouts where we're doing something, say like 2x3 mile, or like trying to use miles here instead of kilometers for you, but 2x10K, 2x30 minute marathon efforts. Yeah. And you can look across those to see how well is heart rate tracking power. And when you're using a flat course, you don't really need power per se. Like the pace is going to be as good a proxy. Remember, this is essentially what we're using it, like we use cycling power for your metabolic work. Like, how hard are you working? Yeah. And people kind of forget that, because that varies, and you can't just chase 730 every single time, because you'll have fatigue, you'll have, inefficiencies, you'll have little headwinds and injuries and things that are going to impact that. But we can, on a flat course, we can see it, but not many people have, an hour of direct flat running to do. And so then being able to use running power, what I typically see and I've got quite a popular video on YouTube about this, analyzing a sub 3 hour marathon attempt, is that there's these big spikes, and in cycling or mountain biking, these are, everyone's very used to seeing this kind of thing. Like, oh, well, I mean, if you're trying to do a time trial, you were in zone 5 for a minute. That's not
like
the smartest thing to
the
do.
variability index.
Right. And I'll get to that as well, because that doesn't work very well for running, because the variability is nowhere near as large as cycling. But so what typically happens is there's these, whenever there's just say an overpass or a bridge, or just that small hill on your way, it's a few hundred, like, what would that be, 100 feet or something small, right? Like nothing. I'll see these big spikes in power to maintain pace, because it's so small. It's half a mile long. You can just push up it. And when we're thinking about a marathon effort, and we're dealing with really aerobically fit individuals, and heart rate, as I said, is the dial-up broadband of metrics. Heart rate might not drift out of zone 2 or zone 3, whatever you're using, over the course of, say, 3 minutes. And it's, you could be pushing into zone 4, or say 105% of your power threshold. Pace looks fine. Heart rate's drifting up, but not until right near the end of the climb. And then you've got the descent. So heart rate starts to come back down. You're back in control of pace. And then I can see these big spikes, and I say, hey, look, if we take a look at this 30-minute effort, there's 3 minutes, there's 4-5 minutes in zone 4, and you're wondering why your heart rate was 190 at the end of the second 30-minute effort. And I see this a lot at the beginning of like a marathon. Like, my pace was good, my heart rate was good. And I was like, yes, but when we're looking at these power efforts, regardless of how fit or efficient you are, and your heart rate being very stable, never exiting zone 3, running a hill at zone 4 plus power is costing anaerobic work. And running is not like cycling. On the downhill, you're not recovering an anaerobic, you're not replenishing your anaerobic work capacity. It's gone burger. Whatever that. Yeah. And so you only have so much anaerobic work capacity. So energy you have above threshold, even within a marathon where you may never go above threshold due to the decay of fatigue within the muscles, means you're going to have to recruit more inefficient muscles as you get through the race. You can blow up. And so I have what I term like speed limits. So by having these running power speed limits, because look, you don't go over 95%, whatever number we've agreed. Don't go over 350 watts. Do not. Because if you do this in a race that's lasting 3.5 hours, it's essentially it'd be like saying, okay, just jog, do marathon pace, and then just go 5K pace for 1 minute. You go, that's dumb. I'm not going to do that. It's like, well, that is what's happening. And that is what running power, regardless, we just forget about how they're measuring it, or, the nuances of the number, whether it's metabolic or mechanical. It is, for once, giving us that objective number to say, like, this is really insightful as to why you were unable to maintain a pace, or achieve the finishing time that you otherwise thought possible.
Yeah. I mean, you're trying to keep those glycogen reserves for the last 3K, not burn them up in the first 10K, and you have these, we term matches, like in cycling, you have so many matches, right? And if you burn those up early, then your pace just has to, by default, fall at the end. So that is a really good insight as to how you can leverage the power actually in race day, especially like in the first half of the race, if you have these undulations, to put like a governor on the effort, to say, don't go above 350 watts, like ever. you might give up 15, 20 seconds here on this climb, but you'll make back, minutes maybe later in the race. And I'm sure we have a lot of trail runners listening. And one thought I had is, in trail running, you wear a pack. You have water flasks, you have a jacket, you have food, gels. That's going to increase your power, right? Compared to if you were running with just a singlet and light pair of shorts. I mean, the absolute power is going to be higher, right? On race day or not.
Well, in theory, yes, 100%. Like if you were going to run your 7:30 mile as your general singlet and shorts, shoes, it's going to be whatever it is. You throw on like multiple pounds, kgs of water and poles and jackets and compulsory gear, it's going to cost you way, energetically, it's going to cost you way more to run that. However, these running power calculations are based off of your personal input metrics. So I have to say that I'm 75 kgs or, 160 pounds and 187 centimeters, or like almost 6'2", right? I have to input that, and then all of my numbers are based off of that.
Mm-hmm.
So and you don't want to go changing it all the time, because then you go, okay, well, I'm going to put my pack on. It's going to weigh. What is it going to weigh? What's it going to weigh when you're full of water versus not? And what's it going to weigh when, you put your jacket on and you sweat? Oh, I don't know. There's too much noise there too. So now you're getting into one of these nuance metrics, right? Where you go, as long as you're testing in the race environment. So you're going to do, when we're thinking trail running, if we're thinking more ultra, you're going to go out and you're going to have a couple of flasks of water, and you might have a jacket, some food. So then we can use the relationship between heart rate and power to get an indication of what are the power numbers we are looking at fully loaded.
Yeah. So you're not going to put in the calculations, the additional weight. You're going to try and just normalize it to no pack on. And should I expect higher watts on race day because I have more pounds on my pack? Should I expect the wattage to go up?
No, if you have higher power, it'll be because you're putting in more effort, not there's the system, whether it's on your wrist. So let's just say it's your Garmin watch. It doesn't know. It doesn't know that there's a child sitting on your back or that you are only wearing shorts. It doesn't know. It's
you're just working harder, yes or no. Yeah.
Yeah. You're exerting this much hypothetical force based off of your mass, height, and speed, and amount of time on the ground of vertical oscillation, all those algorithmic accelerometer based numbers. Put that all together. This is how much work you're doing.
Yeah. And if you've proven in training your threshold's 300 watts, it's still going to be 300 watts. Even if you put a kit on your back, you can only maintain 300 watts for whatever it might be.
Yeah. So, but you put the kit on your back and your threshold now is probably like 250, right?
Yeah. Not that much weight we're adding.
Yeah. Because we've gone over a lot. And I think it might be a little confusing, or it might
you have a course on this as well, which may allow people to absorb it better through the TrainingPeaks University Running with Power Fundamentals, right? Is that the name of the course?
Fundamentals of Running, yeah. And that's been really, really well accepted. The response has been great in terms of curating all of this that I've just shared with you into a more systematic formula for understanding the measurement system itself, and then the application of it is what we go through with my colleague, Dr. Matt Miller. And so where are we at now? Honestly, within trail running, when you're, if I'm thinking about, so I'm thinking about the athletes I have running this weekend, right? 50K, 100K, 100 miles. 100 miles is heart rate. You just need to, we know what fat max is, right? We know what above kind of 85% heart rate is. And you just, when we're thinking 100 miles, you're going for so long, it's just be as efficient as possible. And whether you kind of push up this little hill, it doesn't really matter. Like, you're not going to thrash yourself. You're not sprinting out the gate. So we can have a look at power and say, hey, look, just make sure there is no sustained effort above 90% or anything like that. But heart rate's pretty quickly going to pick that up in an event so long. Yeah. So we just need to be super economical, and we're not really, besides heart rate, besides the actual kind of internal measure of intensity based off environmental conditions like heat and things, heart rate's going to tell us pretty early on, like, look, just pump the brakes a little bit. You got a day ahead of you. Then we get into a 100K, and depending on the runner, depending on the terrain, you could be running a lot of it. And then there could be areas at which you're kind of jogging, but you can, say it's a 3% grade for a few kilometers, a few miles. It's like you could truck along up that. Then also you're, say, 2 hours into a 10, 15 hour event, you're still fit enough to run a lot of it. We're operating at a relative intensity that's so low that heart rate might be bottom of zone 2 versus top of zone 2. And you have a zone 2 allowance, like within your pacing strategy. And so you might not really notice early on that you're actually running at running power output bottom zone 3. Okay, we're not running, we shouldn't be running over 90% power output. We know we're burning some carbs here 2 hours into a 15 plus or like 10 hour plus event. So again, with pace, we're going up the hill, so we're like, oh yeah, pace is about right, heart rate's about right. And you look at running power, you go, oh, sitting 91% of threshold. I'm sitting above 270 watts, and I really shouldn't be doing this. And I know, like, I'm fully loaded here as well. So this is probably costing a lot, but I've tapered. I feel good. Early morning start, conditions are cool, heart rate's low. Like, so in that sense, I'm saying, like, look at it. Then when we've got, say, our big climb where you're hiking a lot of it, it's like pace, power, irrelevant. Or you're just trucking along so slowly, it's super technical. Power's not picking up that you had to step over a log, you're in between two rocks. we just have to rely on heart rate to be our measure of intensity. And then as we get into like the 50K and 50 miles for some, like that 30-mile mark, yeah, we're starting to again we're running a lot more, so we're relying on power a lot more on all the runnable sections because it's heart rate is getting noisy, pace is getting super noisy on the trails. Where are we at? And we're needing this third metric to control our energy output. And that's why I have another video on my YouTube channel around my hierarchy system of using, we have these three metrics. We have the triangle, of heart rate, pace, power. How do we use them?
Yeah.
And how do we use them together based off of the knowledge that we have to ensure that we always have a metric that we can rely on?
Yeah. Well, you mentioned the triangle, and when I started racing or training with power almost 30 years ago now on the bike, it's kind of like I got 3 dimensions. Prior to having power on the bike, I saw 2-dimensional, and you don't even use pace on the bike. You kind of rarely use miles per hour either. I mean, I'm doing a 10K climb up at 5,000 feet above sea level. Like, I'm not looking at miles per hour. So I really only have heart rate and rate of perceived exertion. But once I layered in power, it's like this true kind of workload output, if you will, the output, right, that I'm producing. it really opened my eyes to, again, like a 3-dimensional view of training. And you mentioned this triangle and leveraging all 3 metrics at different times in training and racing. So that's a really cool way to look at it. There's no one overriding metric you're always going to use. Let's say it's pace has great value, heart rate has great value, power has great value. You use them in different ways and they can complement each other, and they create this more 3D view, hopefully, for the coach and athlete to learn from. So yeah, that I'm sure people can learn a whole lot more from your course. And how can people find you just on the web? What's your website, coaching website?
So it's pretty much everything across the platforms at Dr. Will O'Connor, and then drwilloconnor.com. So been putting quite a bit of effort into YouTube recently, and that's been really nice. Well received. So got tens of thousands of views across videos on there, and that's all running specific stuff. But I did have a question for you, actually.
Yeah.
What was cycling power like when it came on? Do you remember the transition of, like, were you an early adopter?
I would say I was, because I was racing with it in the late 90s. Normalized power, TSS, FTP, like none of that existed at the time.
No.
So all we had was laboratories. You had the data from your training and race files. So you could start to track, like, you didn't have metrics of decoupling, et cetera, but you can kind of see heart rate versus power. But then you would be in the lab and taking lactate values, and here's 4 millimole. They had power for decades, right?
Oh yeah, on the low ergometers and all of that.
Exactly. Yeah, so that was always there from when I was maybe 15 years old, when I got my first indoor, physiology test. Like, here's your watts, here's your threshold, here's the heart rate at threshold, but you didn't have a power meter to go leverage when you went training. You only had heart rate. But then you would go back every 3 months or so and track the improvement. But then once you got that power outside, you can actually start to leverage it every day and make references of, like, this is what the lab says my threshold is, and this is what I'm doing in this 20-minute effort. It just wasn't as clear until we got more of these additional higher level metrics created around TSS and normalized power and intensity factor, and you started to, like, make more sense of it. And then from that became, obviously, the performance management chart, and you have acute and chronic training load and training source balance and everything to kind of, like, now that's a little bit more of the 3D view of training. Any one workout is not going to make you a world champion. It's the trends over time, right? So really bringing this all together is where the great value came in for me, is when I could actually see the trends over time and making sense of it, and what type of training led to what kind of output, on race day. So that's a long-winded way of saying, it took a while to kind of, like, coalesce and come together and get a more clear understanding of how to apply, power.
What about the
cycling
adoption, like, where people, I don't know, like, making fun of you for using this thing, where people saying it was going to change cycling, where people just sitting, waiting, like, how the process from you going, hey, I'm late 90s, I've got this thing on my bike, to everyone going, I have no idea what you're talking about, to like, let me get one, I've got one, how do I use it, to, like, that process. I'm just trying to, because the Dr. Matt, who I did the course with, and we've got a mountain biking power course, he was early 2000s when he got one. And, you're plugging things into your computer, you're reading Andy Coggin's book, like, you're trying to decipher everything, but everyone's still like,
I think it was a good maybe 7 years of that, of just like, I might have power, but my 10 riding buddies don't, and they could
Yeah, we've
almost
got
care
heart
less.
rate. What do we need? How's power helping, kind of thing?
Yeah, and they kind of weren't that interested, you know. I think it was a short period of time, more or less of like 6-7 years, from 2000, 2006, 2007, when things really started to, like, the adoption rate really started to, you saw an increase in adoption and understanding of how to leverage it.
Yeah.
So it was a really pretty short time period of 6-7 years, and then it became like, oh, I should get power. Like, all of a sudden you had buddies like, oh, wow, I know they're still really expensive, but man, that'd be really cool. I need to get that, to make the most of my training. So those were the kind of early years, right? And in a way, the U.S. Masters racers were the experts, in terms of like developing all these concepts, and they were ahead of the professional athletes in Europe. Like the Tour de France racers knew less about leveraging power than, a lot of the U.S. Masters cyclists. So that was kind of neat to see that develop. So yeah, hopefully we start to see more. Again, I think more than 30% of all training files coming to TrainingPeaks that are run files have power. I just don't believe 30% of all those folks are actually leveraging it, but they could, right? So hopefully we're educating folks on, okay, there's this new metric coming in, how to make sense of it. When is it good? When is it bad? What are the limitations? How can we actually redefine some aspects of our training intensity? And this technology is never going to stop. It's going to get better and better.
Yeah, I think part of the next stage of adoption will be the integration of structured workouts. So a lot of everyone loves structured workouts. People don't know what I mean. It's within TrainingPeaks, you can build a workout referenced based off of your threshold. You can set a zone, and then it'll push to your device, and you just switch your head off and try and do it. With running power at the moment, we pretty much only have Coros, which can grab some from TrainingPeaks. And then Garmin is like this roundabout way of you have to use Stryd. Everyone else still doesn't support natively structured workouts from TrainingPeaks, so you're having to decipher it in your head. And it just makes that next step so much harder. Like, so I wrote a list like Polar, Sunto, Garmin, Apple can't have structured workouts. Just push directly from training, seamlessly just switch off. Right. Coros can, but then what Coros has done is removed running power and now called it effort pace. Oh. So like I said, this running power number doesn't necessarily need to be power per se. It just is the number that we're using as a proxy for the amount of work we can do. And so they've gone and just adjusted it to kind of like grade adjusted pace. I guess they've called it effort pace. Yeah. And they've put all their eggs in that basket because they believe people understand pace rather than trying to teach a whole new metric, watts. So they're just using same minutes per mile, minutes per kilometer, but they're adjusting it all the same numbers, all the same kind of background algorithms, and then they're just converting it to a pace. So when you're running up that hill, instead of saying 730 and 300 watts, it says 730 and 640 effort pace. So you can just better be like, oh, well, I know I can't run 640 for 10K. That's like
a normalized graded pace.
It's exactly the same thing. It's and Garmin just recently, last year, I think, put that on their NGP, normalized graded pace, as a native metric. And so where we end up over the next few years is going to be interesting. But at this stage, I really recommend people get a Stryd. And one thing that's been really apparent to me over the last couple of years, where I've tested like a lot of watches, just because I love tech and I like to, this Apple, Coros, Garmin, new Garmin's, is that when you have a third party, when you have the Stryd device, you get consistency across all of your devices, right? Like cyclists are you just put your head unit on your bike, and the same thing on the stages you've had for 3 years is still the stages you've had, regardless of the Wahoo or the Garmin or the Hammer head unit you've had. It's just going to read the same. Right. Whereas when we have wrist-based stuff, or you're using a heart rate strap from Garmin, then you use a foot pod from Coros, and like now we're getting all this noise in your data. Whereas when we use a Stryd, it's just here it is. It doesn't matter if you get the new firmware update or of Garmin, or you go from the Phoenix 5 from a few years ago and you've upgraded to the 7 or the Mark X or the 965, and their numbers are all a bit different because they've got, a 9-axis rather than a 7-axis accelerometer. You get consistency. And so for a couple $100 US, I think it adds a lot of continuity moving forward.
Yeah. Wow. Great advice. Yeah. Thanks. You definitely taught me a lot about it. I'm definitely a cyclist at heart. So it's, I come to it with a different aspect, but it's fascinating, and hopefully we continue to see it get adopted and leveraged. So, hey, go check out your website. Thank you, Dr. Will.
All right. Thanks for having me. See you later.
Thanks for listening to the TrainingPeaks CoachCast. Visit trainingpeaks.com for more training and coaching resources.